Selena has been an icon of the LGBTQ community for many years now, particularly with Latinos and Latinas. And we wanted to be able to talk about the relationship of the LGBTQ plus community and Selena, in particular to the different aspects of Selena's life, how she is revered today, and also some of the more seedy aspects of Selena's tale, which includes Yolanda Saldivar. Hi everybody, this is Pedro. Thank you so much for coming to my video. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe, to comment, and to hit the bell. Those are the three things. I always forget what are those three things that I'm supposed to tell you, and those are the three things that I'm supposed to tell you. Also, don't forget that we have a new Facebook group, Tejano Rose. Go and join us. We have more in-depth discussions. You can share more of your content. I'd love to see your collections, your photos, all of that stuff. So come and join us if you haven't yet. So I'm going to split up this video into three parts: the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm actually going to start with the bad, and then the good, and then the ugly. And I think you know where I'm heading to with the ugly. But first of all, let's start out by talking about why Selena is such a cultural icon, particularly for youth in the LGBT community that are Latino, Latina, Latinx, whatever is your preferred term. And I think that there are three basic explanations for that. So number one, I think that Selena is a cultural icon because she's very talented. When we think of women that are also icons in the gay and lesbian community, people like Cher or Judy Garland, Elizabeth Taylor, those kind of, outstanding icons that have stood the test of time. One thing that is in common is that they were very celebrated and very talented. Talented actresses, talented singers, talented performers. And so I think that number one, Selena possesses that number one quality that tends to attract LGBTQ plus to them, which is talent. Now, obviously, this isn't a thing that is only present in the LGBTQ community. Obviously, Selena is revered because of her talent, not just within it. But I'm just saying that to be able to look at those icons that are part of the LGBTQ community, they tend to be very, very talented individuals. Number two, I think that Selena was subversive. That's one thing that I think a lot of LGBTQ icons also have, is that they don't follow the typical path. And you can see why people within the LGBTQ community would be attracted to that, is that many of us who are identify as gay or lesbian or whatnot haven't had a particularly typical path to where we are today. A lot of us had to face secrets and coming out and difficult conversations where we had to explain to somebody that we are not who they thought we were, and explaining that we have a different path set for ourselves, a lot of times for our parents. And I think that Selena is very much in that line, in that she created her own path in the music world. She created her own path in fashion. We saw her take a different path in trying to get together with Chris. And so I think that figures that are a little bit more subversive in what is their environment, that are a little bit different, they forge their own path, I think that they tend to become those cultural icons for the LGBTQ community, because that's exactly what we had to do in our own lives. And so we're attracted to those kinds of situations. I've heard from some people who identify as gay that the song Amor Prohibido, Forbidden Love, is one of those songs that really spoke to them. Now, obviously, the original song was not about, gay, lesbian, or anything like that. It was about class system, but it's still the themes of forbidden love, the themes of people speaking about you behind your back, of telling you that you can't be with the person that you love, certainly carries a lot of weight with people in the LGBTQ community who have had to hide their love for other people, or have had to have people talk behind their backs about their sexuality, or whatever else is happening in families and schools these days. And then finally, the third aspect that I think of why Selena was such an icon, and continues to be an icon in the LGBT community, is that she was an artist through and through. So she used the palette of colors for her face. She used her body as a way to express herself. Her music was incredibly expressive. And, one of the stereotypes is that people who identify as queer are more drawn to the arts. I don't think that there's anything different in queer or LGBTQ or whatever term you would like to use in the arts. I think it's that many of us are attracted to the arts because it's a form of expression, and we have had to repress the way that we want to express ourselves for so long. So it comes out in much more flourishing ways than it might for other people when we had the opportunity to express ourselves. Selena expressed herself with bold underlines. Her colors, her lips were bold and red. Her makeup sometimes was dramatic, sometimes was, understated. Sometimes she wore, that nude lipstick that made her look completely different, or a different color of red. Her hair was very expressive. She used it to tell many different stories. The clothes that she wore also told many different stories. The songs and the way that she expressed herself, it was just so expressive, so artistic in so many different ways. Her fashion, right? And so I think that becomes really important for LGBTQ people, because we need to find those forms of expressions. We're drawn to both forms of expression. I think not for everybody, obviously, that's an overgeneralistic term, but for a lot of us, we couldn't express something as simple as telling our, high school crush that we liked them, because we didn't even know if they would be gay or not. We don't know if they would reject us. We had to figure out how to be able to talk to people, whether it was safe to talk to our families at our work sites. What is acceptable to them? What is are you in a place where you can express yourself fully and not have to worry about repercussions of violence or verbal abuse or things like that. So we use art, I think, a lot of times as a way to express ourselves. And once we're finally free out of the closet, where you can speak about it freely, a lot of times people want to be bold. And Selena was anything if not bold. In the way that she dressed, in the way that she spoke, in the way that she sang, she was bold. And I think that that's one of the things that, for me, attracts me to her. So I'd be interested to hear, why do you think that Selena is such an icon for the LGBTQ community? So put it down in the comments below. I would love to be able to have that discussion with you. I'm also going to open up a discussion in the Facebook thread for us to talk about it, because I think that this is a really important, really cool subject to talk about. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start talking about the bad, the good, and the ugly that there was in relations to Selena's story and the LGBT community. So starting with the bad, and I know that this is going to be seen a little bit more controversial for some people. I'm not saying that religion is bad, but Christianity and the LGBTQ community have not had a good relationship, let's say. I'm not saying that Christians are not tolerant. I'm not saying that there aren't a lot of Christians out there who are very much supportive and allies and don't ascribe to the parts of Christianity that condemn homosexuality. But what I am saying is that in the early 90s, people who were deeply religious were not necessarily very tolerant of people who were not heterosexual. So this is where the bad comes in, right? So what we know about Selena is that she was a Jehovah's Witness. I know that there's some people in the comments that would say, oh, no, she wasn't. Yes, she was. She was a Jehovah's Witness. Her father has said so. Her husband has said so. She was a Jehovah's Witness. And she had expressed in interviews that her spiritual beliefs were very important to her. The early 90s was a different place. People like Selena, particularly celebrities, were expected to be fairly conservative, fairly on the side of family values and all of those things. With Selena, I do think that a lot of that came from her family and from her religious teachings. And then some of that was also the pressure of being a role model. And so she never really took any controversial issues on. So I think that when we talk about Selena and the LGBT community, we really can't ignore that she was a very strong Jehovah's Witness. And out of all of the different Christian religions, Jehovah's Witnesses are one of the harshest ones on LGBTQ communities, including now. As much as we want to put Selena as one of those very tolerant, very proactive kind of people, we really don't know what she would have supported as far as the LGBTQ community. But if we take her religion as a precursor or as a piece of information, and we know that that religion was not particularly tolerant of people who were not heterosexual, then I think that there causes some cause for concern as to where Selena would have stood herself. So those are what I consider to be the bad things, the things that might have been problematic between, Selena's story and life and the LGBTQ community. But I think there's also a lot of other aspects that we need to consider as far as Selena and the LGBT community, which I think are more in the good column and in the positive column. So one of the first things to consider is the fact that Selena was a spokesperson for the Coastal Bend AIDS Foundation. In the early 90s, AIDS was still very much tied as a stereotype for gay men and in the lifestyle of gay men. There would be no, non-gay supporting AIDS Foundation in the early 90s. Certainly, want to clear this up, it's certainly, AIDS is not a gay man's disease. Many people around the world have AIDS that are not gay. And so, we need to put that myth aside. But in the early 90s, they were still tied together very much. And there was no way to sort of take those two out. So if Selena was very concerned about not being tied to the gay community, I would say that she probably wouldn't have been a spokesperson for an AIDS foundation. I think that she must have thought about it, and she must have decided that it was okay to associate this with her image. Another aspect that I want to share, and I'm not going to get into too many details because this is somebody's personal life, but when I went on my first trip to Corpus in San Antonio, this was 5 years after Selena had passed, and so a lot of the family members and roadies and all of those people were still part of the Q production, Selena, etc., extended family sort of unit. And they still are. A lot of families still works at Q Productions and are involved in Selena's production things. But I got to meet this person who was an employee of Selena while she was alive. And so I asked this person if Selena had ever spoken about gay or lesbian people, of how she felt about them. And this person shared, no, never heard Selena speak about gay people in general, but she did have somebody who was a close friend who was openly gay. This person was part of the Dino's Machine. So, they were an employee of the whole Selena enterprise, and that this person was openly gay. So Selena was very good friends with this person and never showed any signs of discontent. We all knew this person was openly gay, and nobody made a fuss about it. And so to me, that leads me to believe that Selena would have had a tolerant, friendly relationship with the LGBTQ community. I'm not sure if she would have been, a flag, waving, rainbow flag waving, marcher down the street. But to me, it's not that she was, not exposed to any gay people, but that she had to have thought about it and had to have made a decision about how she felt. And then finally, in this column of the good is, I think that Selena was in a crossroads as developing her own worldview. There was an interview late in her life, Impacto magazine. This was after probably 1994. I can't remember the date of the magazine. I'll have to go back and look at it, where she's asked a question about politics. Selena had been asked about politics in the past, and she had declined to talk about it. Jehovah's Witnesses are not supposed to get involved in politics. That's one of the tenets. You don't get bogged down in these sort of earthly things. And so that was on brand for Selena to not want to talk about politics. But in this Impacto magazine, they asked a question about what she thought about California's Proposition 187. At the time, Proposition 187 was going to take away services from immigrants, social services from immigrants in California. And she does start answering by saying, I'm not very familiar with this, and I usually don't like to talk about politics. But she goes on and talks about, as she believes, that that's a form of discrimination. And she talks about how the Mexican community and the immigrant community should fight back, and that nobody should be getting a little emotional thinking about this, because it must have been difficult for Selena to say this out loud. Her father was always very nearby, and I'm sure he didn't want her to talk about anything about politics, but she was talking about the people that were buying her album. She was talking about the fans that had supported her. So I'm sure she felt strongly about wanting to say something, but was constrained. One, that I'm sure she didn't know very much about it, but two, that her religion didn't allow her to talk about politics, And two, I'm sure her father and her label would rather she didn't talk about politics, but she talks about that she believes that this is a form of discrimination, and she believes that discrimination, for the language that you speak, for the color of your skin, that shouldn't be tolerated, and that Mexicans and immigrants should fight back, fight to organize and do things about it. And so that doesn't take a very big leap to think that when Selena would have been exposed to more of the LGBTQ community, that she might have started to believe in queer rights and in gay rights, gay and lesbian rights. She was 23 years old. She was very young. She hadn't had the opportunity to be this leader yet. She was starting to get into that role. I think that her views would have evolved, and I think that she would have been, at the very least, a friend to the LGBTQ community. Now, those are just my opinions. I'm biased, as a person who's part of the queer community. I'm certainly biased, and maybe that's part of my own fantasy that I'm a fan of Selena, so I want her to like me, and that I want her to like people like me, and I think of her in these ways. The world has changed so much since she was alive that it's really anybody's guess as to what her real views would have been at this time. And so finally, let's talk about the ugly, because I think it is an important subject to talk about. And when I'm talking about the ugly, I'm talking about Yolanda Saldivar. Now, I want to make it clear, I'm not calling Yolanda Saldivar ugly because of her looks or weight or anything like that. Although the woman could have stood to moisturize her face a little bit more, because she looked much older than her age. She was in her 30s. This woman was in her 30s. She wasn't that much older than Selena, but in pictures, she looks like she's like her mom or older. First, let's get this out of the way. I do not believe that Yolanda and Selena had any sort of improper relationship. There has been, rumors and talks. It's like, oh, they must have been, lesbian lovers or something like that. No, I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that for a second at all. And that has nothing to do with thinking that Selena must be, straight and, all of these things. It's like, there's nothing wrong with being a lesbian. There's absolutely nothing wrong. I don't believe that Selena was a lesbian. I don't think that there were any signs or anything to believe that would have been the case. So I wouldn't support a theory that is not based on any factual information. So I think that one of the things that we do need to unpack is, was Yolanda a lesbian? She says that she is not. And we have to take her at her word. That's just the way that it is that we have to take people at their word as to who they are. Now, with that being said, you don't have to have a love relationship with somebody to have an obsessive, controlling, abusive relationship. That can be true with friends. That can be true in romantic relationships. That could be true in families. So what's really difficult about having this conversation about Yolanda as well is that in the early 90s and before, gay and lesbian people were portrayed as villains in many situations. So for a lot of people, having that conversation about Yolanda was probably a lesbian, it's, feeding into that stereotype of, oh yeah, she was probably in love with her, she was a lesbian and Selena didn't want her and so she killed her. I don't know if it's that simple. And I think that we have to make sure that we're not perpetuating stereotypes when we're talking about those things. Gay and lesbian people are more likely to be the victims of crime rather than the perpetrators of crime. So when we're having these conversations, please don't perpetuate these stereotypes that gay and lesbian people are violent and are in love with people or not back in love with them and they're going to shoot them and kill them and do all of these things. With all of that being said, is it possible that Yolanda was a lesbian and was in love with Selena, that she had repressed emotions towards Selena? It's possible. Certainly it's possible. I don't think that's why she killed her. I think Yolanda killed her because she was a conniving, ugly snake and that took advantage of Selena. But Yolanda stole from Selena. That's not what you do from somebody that you love. Yolanda lied to Selena multiple times. Yolanda tried to control Selena multiple times. Yolanda tried to have Selena isolated from her family and other workers and friends that she had. Those are not signs of love. So that's why I wanted to talk about this as the ugly, because it's an ugly conversation to have, that because Yolanda killed Selena, then she must have been in love with her or she must have been a lesbian. Take a step back from that. think about what are the stereotypes that you're perpetuating if you're the person that is saying that. And if you want to have that conversation, we can, and we can talk about some of those things. The fact that Yolanda was religious as well, that she comes from that was the youngest daughter in a large family where she was seen as the provider, where her family was very traditional. So it could have led to repression of feelings. But I don't think that's why she killed her. That's a completely different conversation. So I don't see Selena's murder as a crime of passion. I don't see Selena as possibly being the object of affection from Yolanda, and that's why she's dead. I don't think that matters at all into the conversation. What I do see are patterns of a manipulative person. But again, these are my beliefs and my thoughts. I think that we all have our own opinions and thoughts, and I would love to hear from them in the comments. For those of you that are part of the LGBTQ community, I wanted to end with a little bit of a positive note that, the opposite of shame is pride. And that's what Pride Month is about to me, is for those of us that identify with this community, and for those of you that have family members or are allies or, are just supportive in general of people who love other people, thank you for that. And if you love Selena and you are, a drag queen who dresses up as Selena, if you rock memorabilia, if you do makeup and you're a boy, if you are a woman that has, crazy awesome tattoos of Selena that other people consider to be masculine or non-gender conforming, if you are just a straight heterosexual man who is sometimes afraid to be a Selena fan because you think that they're going to think that you're gay, keep doing it, because we make Selena's fan base. And I was that young man that considered taking my own life when I was younger, when I realized that I wasn't quite normal, that I wasn't like everybody else, or so I thought. And learning about Selena saved my life. Because I thought, here's this woman who fits in so well, who is so popular, who is beautiful, who has, money and fans, and her life was taken away. At least I have my life. So I can continue to do that. And I also kind of wanted to continue Selena's legacy. I wanted, her life was gone. And so I thought, well, I can still go to school. I can still do good things with myself, with my family, with my community. And, as an homage to her, the fact that she can't do that anymore. She will continue to do it through me. And I know that a lot of you feel that same way. So, continue doing it, continue being subversive, continue speaking your mind, continue loving Selena's music, dressing like her if you feel like it, putting on the makeup. It doesn't matter what anybody says because you're not doing it for them. You're doing it to continue Selena's legacy. And I see you. And I appreciate you. And thank you for being there. Aloha.